The scientific method predicts the future. Theoretically, anything could be defined as a science, because science simply means knowledge. But in practical usage, science has been reserved for those areas of knowledge that are amenable to the scientific method. Experiments are conducted under specific circumstances, and the results can be duplicated by anyone at any time, as long as the same experiment is conducted under the same conditions. This tends to be limited to the physical sciences and the material world. They are identified as the natural sciences. But much belongs to the natural sciences that is not limited to the material world. Consciology contends that everything is consciousness. Consciousness includes the material world and the mental world. It does not include the mystical world of the spirit, though it does reclaim many of the realities of the mind that mysticism has attempted to claim as part of its unknowable spirit world. So to the consciologist, mental sciences like psychology, philosophy, and economics are no less scientific than the natural sciences of the physical world. For these areas, too, are amenable to the scientific method. The problem with synthesizing these physical and mental properties of human beings revolves around the objective and the subjective points of view. The searchers after authority are in control of most of what is taught to our children. They have made a point of stressing the superiority of the objective point of view to that of the subjective point of view. This fits nicely with their distrust and subjugation of the individual subjective to that of the trustworthy and all-knowing authority objective. If one adopts their assertion that individuals cannot be trusted, then it is impossible to escape their conclusion of the necessity of a savior or authority. However, escaping this trap is easy, since both viewpoints can agree that the scientific method is to be the final arbiter. The subjective is defined as existing in the mind of the individual. The objective is defined as existing external to the mind, the physical world. The searcher after authority tends to equate objective with real and subjective with unreal. The searcher after what is tends to equate subjective with real and objective with unreal. But solutions are built on working with the positives and not the negatives. The one positive is that each viewpoint agrees that reason is important and that the scientific method is the universal means for establishing fact. Also, there is no immediate conflict as regards matters in the physical world. The problem appears when considering the mental realm. The searcher after authority holds that the mind is purely subjective and thus not amenable to the scientific method. The searcher after authority says that subjectively, each human comes to certain mental conclusions, and that one human's mental conclusions are as good as the next, for none can be trusted. That is the reason that an authority must be discovered to identify for all what is right and what is wrong, what is fact and what is not in the mental realm, not to mention the spiritual realm of mysticism. However, the searcher after what is approaches reality from a largely opposite point of view. The searcher after what is says that subjectively each individual comes to certain mental conclusions, and that one's future development stems solely from one's own understanding. There is no authority that intercedes, and what is fact in the mental realm is solely the responsibility of the individual to identify. The spiritual realm of mysticism is nothing more than a device that the searcher after authority creates, hoping to strengthen that point of view. Though the two points of view appear to be irreconcilable, there is still the agreement on the scientific method as the tool for determining fact. This appears to be a mechanism of value solely in the objective realm of the physical world and solely unsuited to an investigation of the subjective mental realm. But if the scientific method is the only tool upon which both the searcher after authority and the searcher after what is can agree, then it behooves us to make sure that the concept is thoroughly understood. It is a tool far more grand than is normally suspected. Most who feel they understand the method well still do not comprehend its scope. The scientific method permits independent verification of facts by individuals differing in race, sex, religion, social standing, and political persuasion. As long as the same procedure is repeated under the same conditions, the result will be the same. Political influence, not a factor. Outright bribery, not a factor. Gangster force, not a factor. Religious curse, not a factor. Nothing has any significance except what is. No authority can change the outcome. It was the scientific method applied to the physical world that brought forth the Renaissance. Mysticism, in the form of religion, had stifled reason in the Middle Ages. Reason was in retreat until the Renaissance reinstated it. It was the scientific method applied to the world of trade that brought forth the Industrial Revolution. Mysticism, in the form of nationalism, formed mighty political governments that tended to stifle free trade. The Industrial Revolution again reinstated reason. Today, mysticism, in both religion and political governments, is recovering in power, powers that tend to stifle the individual. The Renaissance returned reason to prominence by applying the scientific method to the physical world of minerals, plants, and animals. The Industrial Revolution returned reason to prominence by applying the scientific method to making it easier for individuals to come together in trading. It was discovered that trades left both parties better off than before the trade. More free trades meant less conflicts and more compatibility among otherwise diverse individuals. These were demonstrable facts backed by proofs using the scientific method. To anyone who wished to examine free trade under the microscope and to repeat the conditions that permit it to occur, the result is verified, whether practiced in Britain, the U.S., Japan, or wherever. The results are the same. As good as that seems, it still may not be quite apparent just how good that is. The greatest result of the scientific method is that it provides perhaps the only reliable means of foretelling the future. You are not sure you are capable of telling the future with any certainty? Sure you are. Can you predict the result of planting a seed in the ground and giving it the proper care? Can you not only predict that a plant will grow, but can you predict the exact variety of plant? Can you predict a future accompanied by an unpleasant odor when heating sulfur? Can you predict a future of listening to a musical note after forcing your breath through the tubes of a trumpet? Can you predict a future where a mighty automobile roars into life after you turn the key in the ignition? Can you predict the future by predicting a world of increased happiness, by fostering conditions that will encourage the transaction of free trades? Perhaps not, as there are many variables that are beyond the power of limited, imperfect, and incomplete individuals to control. The point is that by using the scientific method, human beings have been able to miraculously increase the scope of actions available to them, whereby they can predict the future with an extraordinary accuracy. There is more. It is true that the scientific method enables one to predict the future. But as remarkable as that is, it is hardly worth mentioning in comparison to the principal benefit afforded by the scientific method. Not only does one predict the future, one can be the creator of that future. All of the conditions must be exact if the scientific method is to produce the predicted results. This requires the circumstances that are only possible under laboratory conditions. When discussing minerals, plants, even animals, these conditions can be achieved with relative ease. Neither minerals, plants, nor animals are recognized as having rights, or more precisely, they are not recognized as having the cardinal right, the right to ownership. The scientific method can be explored unfettered regarding minerals, plants, and animals. Consciology holds that the scientific method applies no less to human beings than it applies to minerals, plants, and animals. But that presents problems. Gangs, religions, and governments have experimented with human beings, much like experimenting with minerals, plants, and animals. This has been carried out just as if there were no difference between minerals and plants, and especially as if there were no difference between animals and human beings. But Consciology holds there is a fundamental difference between animals and human beings. Namely, that animals are conscious and human beings are self-conscious. As self-conscious human beings, they separate themselves from animals with the recognition of their inalienable right to own themselves and other things. It follows that their inalienable right to own themselves applies equally to all human beings. Thus, it is not possible to have a right to own another human being, or to curtail the right of another human being to own oneself and to own things such as minerals, plants, and animals. But at this point, the benefits of the scientific method seem to have run their course. What appeared to work so well at revealing the secrets of the physical world seems to be entirely powerless to disclose the secrets of the mental world. It appeared to some that this problem was solved when Dr. Carl Jung advanced the concept of archetypes. Searchers after authority tell us that what people think is of no great moment. Thinking does not make it so. Individuals cannot make important decisions, but must leave those to the authorities. There is no right and wrong, or black and white, but only varying shades of gray. If these did describe the mental world, it would indeed be different than the physical world. But on the contrary, the physical and the mental are simply two aspects of the one entity we call a human being. If the scientific method is a valuable tool of reason as regards the physical world, it will be equally valuable to decoding the mental realm. That may be easy to say, but there are obvious differences between applying the scientific method to physical and mental experimentation. Animals can be abused in order to discover their effect on living tissue without jeopardizing a human being in the experiment. Human beings are not expected to give up their social lives and surrender themselves 24 hours a day, and perhaps for a lifetime, simply to complete some experiment. But that is only the beginning of the problems. To conduct an experiment regarding a mental thesis, it is necessary to isolate the mental function in order to be sure that the observed condition is a reaction to the experimental factor and not to something else entirely. Since this apparently is impossible regarding mental functions, few are willing to argue with the searcher after authority. The searcher after authority renounces the possibility of achieving individual knowledge and places all hope on the search after authority that can relieve the individual of his responsibility. All that the searcher after authority asserts, in fact, in regard to what is possible in the outside world, is fact in regard to what is possible in the outside world. Everything is relative, and there is no right or wrong, or black and white, only varying shades of gray, unless one is able to apply the scientific method to the mental world. And one can. No, a searcher after authority cannot. because the search for an outside authority is doomed. It is the searcher after what is that searches within one's own psyche for what is that can bring order out of the chaos that appears to occupy the mental region. The laboratory moves from the aseptic sinks and microscopes of the physical laboratory into the confines of the mind of an individual human being. It is one's own mind that becomes the laboratory of the searcher after what is. No useful observations will be made in a physical laboratory that fails to maintain aseptic conditions. Results could be altered by endemic conditions instead of the condition being tested. Likewise, the individual searcher after what is required to maintain an aseptic mental environment. What the germ represents in the physical laboratory, dishonesty represents in the mental laboratory. Without total honesty, the scientific method's results are worthless. The searcher after authority can afford to tell oneself that there is no right or wrong because the searcher after authority is describing what is outside of oneself. From that perspective, it is often correct that there is little difference between right and wrong, and everything is relative. But that is the searcher after authority, focusing on the physical world outside of oneself. The searcher after what is has determined that the outside search is destined to fail and has redirected that search inward. In attempting to become the laboratory that can discover what is, the searcher after what is finds that this laboratory can only function in an environment of complete honesty. This is not honesty defined by the searcher after authority, where it is not wrong unless the authority discovers it and proclaims it to be wrong. This is honesty. Dishonesty is do-it-yourself honesty, where the searcher after what is judge, jury, and executioner. This is not searcher after authority honesty, where it's not wrong because no one knows. This is searcher after what is honesty, where no one else knows, but I know, and I know it is wrong. In the final analysis, if you want to search after what is without honesty, what is cannot be found. The question is, do you want to succeed in the search after what is or not? The dishonesty of the searcher after authority involves claiming to be able to support by reason what one merely senses emotionally. The searcher after authority may correctly perceive that the goal is good fortune to all, but they let their emotions run ahead of their reason, wanting so much the validation by others of their insight, pride. They falsely claim to know how to achieve the goal. but they do not know how to achieve it. The search after authority is a dip in the graph of living. The apparent shortcut from the beginning of the dip to a comparable level on the other side fails to bridge the gap. Only by riding the dip to its depth and hitting bottom can genuine understanding and ascending the dip on the other side result. By confronting one's animal behaviors, instincts, one reaffirms one's choice for self-consciousness. One begins to recognize that self-consciousness repudiates the existence of the outside authority and confirms the sovereignty of individual responsibility. It is not a matter of choice between viable options. The searcher after what is recognizes that outside authority is not. Individual responsibility is. How to achieve this degree of honesty will be discussed in an upcoming chapter. The point here is that this honesty is a prerequisite for utilizing the scientific method. The next step is to determine how the scientific method can be applied to the mental world, even with an environment of honesty. The psychiatrist Dr. Carl Jung devised a concept of archetypes that he felt were present in what he called the unconscious. The consciologist would say that the archetypes exist in consciousness of which the individual is not yet aware. In any case, the archetype represents an area of the mental world that exists independently of the individual's present ability to consciously perceive it. The point is that the archetype exists and influences the actions of the individual, even when its existence is beyond one's current conscious awareness. If this is a fact, the archetype represents a link between the subjective individual mind and the objective world of what is. The concept of archetypes appears to permit objectivity to be applied to the subjective mental world. The concept of archetypes seems to permit the scientific world to be applied to the mental world. The concept of archetypes seems to bring order to the mental world. What makes it possible to apply the scientific method to matters of the mind is that these same archetypes present themselves everywhere, in civilized societies and uncivilized. In societies influenced by contact with neighboring societies, and those on remote islands that could never have made contact with another society. In individuals educated and without learning, in individuals deemed sane, and those with extreme mental problems. Archetypes appear to represent a kind of universal language, understood by all human beings, though not at a conscious level that would permit the individual to freely share this knowledge with others. It is much too subtle, but its presence can nevertheless become obvious. There are many different paths by which an expansion of consciousness is achieved. Though the paths differ, they share common crossroads or archetypes. Like signposts at the crossroads, archetypes affirm one's progress on whatever path and from wherever one begins. Further understanding of the concept of archetypes requires a totally new appreciation of myths. In present-day usage, myths are associated with legends. They are understood to involve imaginary persons and things and to embody primitive faith in the supernatural. With Consciology representing the antithesis of mysticism, it might appear that Consciology and myths would likewise be at odds. But myths, while often dealing with primitive concepts, nevertheless may involve tales that contain more fact than do things that actually happen. They may involve beings that are not real, but reveal more reality than do most real beings. The question is not whether the myth actually happened. The question is, to what extent does the tale provide information that can be helpful in expanding one's awareness of consciousness? The validity of the myth is determined by what it can tell us about what is, not whether the myth occurred at a particular place and time. Many events can be proven to have occurred at a particular place and time, but provide no glimpse as to what is that might help to expand one's awareness of consciousness. On the contrary, provable events might serve to mislead one into thinking it serves to expand one's awareness of consciousness, when in fact its message is false. The conflict is one that requires a value judgment between the physical world and the mental world. As without, so within, makes this same comparison and comes down firmly on the side of the mental world within. The searcher after what is makes the same comparison and chooses within and the mental world as being of primary importance. Human beings renounced instinct in favor of self-consciousness and again chose in favor of the mental faculty. A tool was chosen that human beings could utilize to facilitate their expansion of one's awareness of consciousness. That tool is reason, the reasoning facility of the individual mind. In the end, human beings always side with mind over matter. In regard to myths that they have not yet decided, there are so many valid reasons for dismissing myths. That they ever happened at all is greatly suspect. They are often primitive and easily discounted with modern knowledge. They involve mysticism, the supernatural, and blind faith, all of which are repugnant to the search after what is. But all of that counts for little if the tale illustrates an aspect of consciousness that might otherwise be easily misunderstood. With all of its shortcomings, the myth quite often communicates what is with a clarity not otherwise attainable. If the purpose of life is to expand one's awareness of consciousness, the myth cannot be dismissed simply because it presents itself in a soiled garment. At the core of many a myth is a hint of what is. Rejoice in the revelation while rejecting the mysticism. Archetypes are like islands in the sea of the mind. They may not represent the destination, but they are valuable in charting one's course and in verifying that one is headed in the right direction, even though they may be populated with savages. Is a reality in consciousness to be ignored because its physical reality cannot be confirmed? Does physical reality or mental reality provide a more reliable proof? Is it not when the physical proves hopeless that the searcher after authority resumes the search after what is, abandoning the outward search in favor of a search within one's own consciousness? The value of the physical world is to demonstrate the myriad of inadequate possibilities that exist. It is only after examining the physical world in great detail that one is able to discover its ultimate inadequacy. It is tragic to dismiss the myth because its historical details are questionable. Myths are not about physical history. Myths are about revelations of consciousness that assist one in foretelling the future. The scientific method enables us to tell the future by defining how natural laws operate in the physical world. Myths aid us to tell the future by defining how natural laws operate in consciousness. Jung discovered archetypes in the drawings of psychiatric patients and was struck by the universality of the images and their relationship to mythological characters and events that the patient had never encountered. Jung had no desire to mix religion with his clinical investigations, but was struck by the similarities of events in his patients' dreams and visions with those of the sacraments in the Christian church, even when the patient had no religious background. A bit more investigation revealed that they also had equally obvious relationships with ancient mythology. In many instances, it was discovered that the primitive church had simply adapted heathen custom into the church under new names. Whatever the origin, the event appeared to identify a universality in consciousness that confirmed the existence of objective fact in the content of consciousness, and that these objective facts existed independently of the perception of a particular individual's concept of it. Psychologists worldwide were discovering these common archetypes occurred in the psyche of patients who could not possibly have a common physical heritage that would explain these duplicate revelations of consciousness. Concepts like a hero and a savior, sacrifice and redemption, appeared not only to confirm a universal kinship among all human beings, but that there was in fact a spiritual component of consciousness to consciousness. Of course, this spiritual component is interpreted by Consciology to be conscious energy. The reality of a conscious energy that is shared by all humanity possesses all of the emotional fervor of a religious experience without the necessity of sacrificing one's existence to an alien authority. These archetypal trail markers are invaluable in the quest to expand one's awareness of consciousness. Though they were discovered by investigating the consciousness of mentally disturbed individuals, it became obvious that they reside as well in the consciousness of all human beings. Just as with fables, these archetypes are valuable to expand one's awareness of consciousness, regardless of the superstition and mysticism in which they are immersed. Their immersion takes the form of religious sacraments, following the path of Christ to the cross, and some of the symbols of Freemasonry, to name a few. Maybe it was too good to be true for archetypes to provide the missing link between scientific analysis of the physical world and the mental world. But with recent progress in understanding of family group dynamics, the independent identity of archetypes as milestones in consciousness has come into question. It is now possible to explain the universality of archetypes in terms of family dynamics. The search for the hero and the savior can be explained as searches for an ideal father figure. The search for ideals of beauty and purity can be explained as searches for an ideal mother figure. In any case, archetypes do represent universal verities in consciousness that prove that the subjective can be refined to a degree that approaches the objective. However, there is one immense qualifier when dealing with the mental world of human beings that is not a concern when dealing with the physical world. Human beings are self-conscious individuals who possess the power to override conditions that would otherwise invariably produce a particular result. So it can never be possible to scientifically predict exact results of mental experiments with quite the same degree of accuracy with which one can predict the results of physical experiments. To maximize understanding in the physical world, it is necessary to recognize the relatively recent emergence of reason and the recognition of the scientific method. In nature, consciousness is ruled by emotion. From chemical properties and the properties of each particular phylum or species to the emotions of human beings, emotion determines all action. It is meaningless to discuss moderation in regard to nature. Nature does everything to excess, limited only by the properties of the specimens involved. Moderation only occurs when emotion is tempered by reason. It is only with self-conscious human beings that actions can be modified by one's own understanding. Only then do freedom of choice and personal responsibility emerge. In one of its simplest forms, one chemical is acidic, another is alkaline. The acid does nothing alone, but the acid will ceaselessly act to modify chemical combinations it encounters that are susceptible to its characteristics. The alkaline does not modify those chemical combinations that the acid attacks. Its addition merely stops the modifying action of the acid. Emotion is like an acid. It acts without ceasing. Reason is like an alkaline. It stops the emotion's actions. Emotion starts the action. Reason stops the action. It does not appear to be a very dynamic range of possibilities, but it is all there is. And it is much more than it might at first appear. The photographic process involves acids and alkalis. The photographer calls them activator and stopback. The acid brings out the photographic image. The stopback deactivates the acid. This either makes the photographic image visible when a single print is the goal, or it makes the plane of the non-photographic image alkaline, or physically lower than that of the photographic image, permitting duplication of the photo by the appropriate printing technique. Nature provides each of the chemicals. One possesses a property of being acid. Another possesses a property of being alkaline. Each displays an emotional character that is intemperate. Each will demonstrate its characteristics to the point of dissipation. It is with human beings that intemperate characters become susceptible to temperance. Adding reason to the mix empowers the human being to consciously participate in the creation process. The human being modifies the ingredient of time. The duration of time that the acid acts before the alkaline stops the action determines the exposure of the photographic image. The spectrum may progress from black to white, or from no color to exact shades of unlimited colors. The proper exposure is the result of the moderation of the acid's action. And it is reason that tempers emotional actions that free the individual to participate in the creation of one's own universe. One's freedom of choice is limited to the timing of when the acid's action is neutralized. Yet this timing choice enthrones the individual as a participant in creation. The entire spectrum of possibilities is available. One's choices here are absolute and unlimited, for none are denied. The entire spectrum is at hand. The length of time the acid acts determines the degree of exposure on this spectrum that extends from being to nothingness, from nothingness to being. Let's inspect this same process in other manifestations. Humanity's very existence is dependent upon plants that provide the plant food for our stomachs and the oxygen food for our lungs. These are the result of photosynthesis, where the plant's chlorophyll reacts to the sun's energy to produce the fuel that enables human beings to function. Photosynthesis can be compared to this acid-alkaline action. The interaction of chlorophyll and sunlight produces the food. Sunlight performs the role of the acid that acts. Water functions as the alkaline that stops the chlorophyll sunlight action before it does harm to the plant cells. Likewise, the human digestive system that processes this food created by photosynthesis acts in a similar manner. Acids introduced into the stomach break up the food cells so that they can be assimilated by the cells of the body. When the food passes out of the stomach into the small intestine, alkaline enzymes are added from organs like the pancreas and the liver that neutralize the acid before it totally consumes the food. The acid is necessary in the stomach, but it can be disastrous if it continues to work in the intestines. There it would consume delicate intestinal linings and any other body cells with which it came in contact. The acid's action is required for the initial breakdown of the food, but no more. Though the acid serves a necessary purpose from the viewpoint of the body cells, it is seen as nothing but poison. It is important to understand this point of view of the body cells in order to comprehend the valuable role these poisons play in the health of the human being. In homeopathy and many other herbal remedies, illness of the human body is treated with these so-called poisons. The poison is administered, followed by the antidote with such precise timing that the out-of-balance body is tweaked back into a healthy alignment. The poison, administered in exact amounts, may not need the further introduction of the antidote, as the body's own immune system often provides that. All drugs should be viewed as being these poisons, because their net effect on the body is a negative one. But that is of little consequence to the body with impaired health. It should be noted here that administering one poison to offset another poison cannot be interpreted as a proof of two wrongs making a right. The neutralization of one poison by the other results in a net negative, but the degree of the negative action is reduced to manageable proportions. It is well to remember that the introduction of any drug into the body is poisonous. That is, its net effect is negative, even when appropriate. When introduced to treat an ailment that is not present, it can become a new ailment in what had been a healthy organism. The human being's scope of action continues to be severely limited, incomplete, and imperfect. But the scientific method enables one to predict the future, and expanding one's awareness of consciousness expands one's capacity to create that future.